I'm now joined by human rights activist and Israel Palestine Advocacy Director at Democracy for the Arab World Now, Adam Shapiro. Adam Shapiro, your organization, Dawn, is one of many that have called for a full investigation into what it says was, quote, the killing of yet another American citizen by Israeli forces this year, calling for holding those responsible accountable. What are the chances of that really happening beyond the perfunctory statements that we always hear?
This is really a crucial topic at this point. This is the second American citizen to be killed by Israeli forces or where they were culpable in the death. And unfortunately, in the case of Omar Assad, which happened in January, we haven't heard any additional information about that investigation. We don't trust that the Israelis are carrying out an investigation. And that's why in this case with Shireen, we and others are demanding an independent and in fact a US investigation into this killing. Once we get that investigation, then the work is on to make sure there is accountability, that there is some measures taken to bring those perpetrators to justice. One thing I am a bit happy to see is that the White House statement this time mentioned bringing a prosecution, which is unprecedented as far as I know from the White House.
You say you're demanding a U.S. investigation, but the U.S. State Department, the U.S. government seems okay with the idea of Israel investigating its own alleged abuses. Could an Israeli investigation be transparent, credible, and reliable?
I don't know any other circumstance in which the perpetrator, the criminal, is allowed to conduct their own investigation. It's an absurd situation on its face. But then beyond that, we have the track record, we have the evidence, the proof that exists year after year, where Israel claims it will conduct an investigation, make it thorough and credible, and then nothing happens. We've had this with the case of American citizens. I mentioned Omar Assad, but there's also Richard Corey, there's Mohammed Shaban. We don't need more proof that the Israelis won't carry out an investigation. And we have the precedent in the case of Daniel Pearl in Pakistan, an American citizen, a journalist who was killed in the line of duty while being a journalist, where the FBI went and investigated and assisted a very willing partner in the Pakistani authorities in those days to conduct an investigation. Here we have a partner, the Israelis, who refused to investigate.
But how do you change this reality, and how do you hold the Israeli government to the same legal standards as other governments who stand accused of violating international norms? If the US administration, the US Congress, isn't willing to use its considerable leverage on Israel, how do you ensure accountability? I mean, some people are suggesting restricting military aid to Israel, but that isn't going to happen, is it?
Well, it's not going to happen right away, but we believe that over time that change is starting to occur. We're starting to see change in Congress in terms of the number of Congress people who are willing to speak out, who are willing to question the norm of unquestioned U.S. military aid to Israel and other forms of aid to Israel. And so it is a trickle at this point, there's no doubt, but that is how we get to a bigger position. We should remember and take this into context. The United States was one of the last governments, if not the last, ultimately, that took action to move against apartheid South Africa, which is the closest analogy historically to what we have with Israel today. I fully expect that the United States will probably be the last government to move when it comes to Israel, even as it's the most important enabler of Israeli occupation.
But if political change realistically is going to take time to achieve, given the ironclad support that Israel has long received by both members of both parties, the Republicans and Democrats, and if the measures that have been taken by the Palestinian-led BDS movement to sanction Israel have been met by this relentless campaign by pro-Israel groups, what other recourse do human rights defenders and pro-Palestinian activists in the United States really have?
I think we are seeing that the effects of those campaigns, the BDS campaign and other work that's done at the level of engaging Congress and engaging other institutions in this country, academia, you can't go anywhere in the United States on any college campus today and not realize that the mood has changed, that it's not possible anymore for campuses to not be active on the cause of justice for Palestine, whether it be through BDS action or disinvestment or other kinds of student organized efforts.
But they face punishment. Are they able to say whatever they want?
There are attempts to punish, but even then, those are being pushed back. Even the legislation that got introduced against BDS has started to be rolled back by courts. Courts are saying, no, this is freedom of expression. This is a bottom line fundamental American right. So even these efforts to quash and silence and criminalize are coming up against pushback, are failing. And ultimately, that's a sign of how powerful these movements are, is the strength and effort to shut them down.
But what does it tell us about the United States today when so many states have passed laws punishing, criminalizing boycotts of Israel, which many would say threaten the constitutional right to engage in boycott and free speech? Some have lost their jobs because they've refused to sign a pro-Israel oath, which is now mandatory in many states. What does it tell us about the state of affairs in the US today when it comes to what you can and cannot say about Israel?
I think what it says about the state of affairs in the United States institutionally is that we have a lot of work to improve this democracy. Our system is too vulnerable to interest groups, to lobby groups, whether it be in the favor of Israel, in the favor of, or those opposing gun control, or those opposing healthcare for free and affordable healthcare for all. I think what we have to do is strengthen our institutions, and in some ways, the pro-Israel lobby acts as the canary in the coal mine. What we are seeing from climate change activists is a recognition that the anti-BDS legislation that's been introduced is the forefront, the tip of the spear of efforts to shut down other progressive causes like climate change legislation that would help change the way this country is burning through natural resources, or whether it comes to Black Lives Matter issues. So we're starting to see that there's this recognition on an intersectional level across progressive causes that we have to work together, because the efforts against us may start with Palestine, but they're going to continue all across the spectrum and really change life in the United States for the worse. We just saw that, in fact, with the leaked Supreme Court ruling in terms of abortion rights and sexual and reproductive health rights in America. That is a harbinger of what's to come if we don't make sure that this pushback occurs on all levels, not just in Congress, but in every state capital around the country.
An important moment on so many different fronts. Adam Shapiro, thank you so much for being with us.
Thank you for having me.